Welcome to another edition of HC Magazine's People You Should Know. I'm your host, David Madalena. We have a really interesting conversation that we're going to have today with our next guest. Have you ever wanted to know what the perfect cannabis strain was going to be for you? Well, our next guest is working on just that by sequencing your DNA and matching the right strain with the right product. Think 23andMe, but for cannabis. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Len May. He's the CEO and co-founder of Endocanna Health. And it's a bio-research company specializing in personalized and medicinal cannabis using DNA sequencing. How are you today, Len?
I'm great, David. How are you?
Excellent. Thanks so much for being on the show today. So, did I get that right? Kind of the 23andMe for cannabis?
Well, I think I like to look at ourselves a little bit more like the love connection. So it's an old school show. Most people probably don't even remember what it is, but we look at ourselves as more of a scientific matchmaker. So your DNA with your genetics may influence your experience with cannabis, CBD, and terpenes. So what we look at is how your DNA can influence that and how to find the right combination of cannabinoids and terpenes, and also how to find something that's not going to perpetuate a possible adverse effect.
And so how long have you guys been working on this process?
So we've been working on this for the last 3.5 years as a company. I've been doing this for the last 10 years as an individual, working in different labs and focusing a lot of my efforts on the plant genetics. So doing genetic sequencing of the cannabis plant, and then looking to see how we can match up different genetic markers, which are called SNPs or polymorphisms, that affect directly or indirectly your endocannabinoid system. And that way, one of the things that I want to sort of point out, because you were mentioning strains, we look at it more as a ratio of cannabinoids and terpenes that are more aligned with your genetic expression. So the strains themselves, the names of the strains don't really matter. It's what the consistency of that formulation is. So the percentage of cannabinoids, your THC, your CBD, and also your terpene profile, and in addition, your method of consumption. All those factors play a role in your experience with cannabis.
So, for example, so let's just say, okay, I like to smoke flower personally. So would I fill out a form saying, here's my DNA and here's how I like to consume it. I consume flower this way. And then you're going to basically from what, a mouth swab, or is it a blood test? How does that work?
Yeah. So you go on to our website, endocannahealth.com, and you order a kit. You get the kit in the mail. It comes in a box. Within that, there is what's called a buccal swab, which is basically a large Q-tip. You swab this in your mouth. You register it, and that data is anonymized, and it belongs directly to you because we're HIPAA compliant. You put it back in the box it came with, and you mail it over to our lab. Once you do that, we'll run a genetic sequence, and we will send you an email. You'll log into your personalized secure portal, which is anonymized, as I mentioned, and we'll provide you a report looking at different symptomatic conditions that are associated with cannabinoid use and what your specific, what's called a genotype is with those symptomatic conditions. So to give you more of an example, it would be like anxiety or pain or sleep quality or depression, psychotic-like effects even. So in certain people, certain cannabinoids, like THC, for instance, may perpetuate a feeling of anxiety or even psychosis-like effect. And if that's the case, there is a certain genetic profile that can be triggered. And if that's your genetic profile, we will suggest a formulation to mitigate the possible negative expression so you don't have those side effects you don't want and still consume the benefits that you want from the plant. So to align that with a strain per se, That's something that we can do by looking at the test results for the COAs from the different labs based on those strains, and to see what is the ratio of cannabinoids and terpenes, what is the cannabinoid profile, like how much THC, how much CBD, and what is the primary and secondary dominant terpene profile, and then we can match that up to suggest an alignment of that specific ratio.
Wow. I mean, it's fascinating. And I apologize. We started going right into the science of it. And I honestly wanted to get a little bit of your background as well, as to where you came from to be able to do this science. But I'm so fascinated by the science of what you're doing. And I guess my question, and maybe we'll just flip the script and get more into your background afterwards, because we're already rolling with this. All right, so let's just take you through this process. So I take this test, you give me this information. Now I know, okay, I need a ratio of, let's say, 1-to-1 THC to CBD, or maybe it's a little different, and then I'm better with some limonene in my system as opposed to myrcene, and it works better for me that way as a terpenoid profile. Well, then what? I mean, are you able to then say, okay, here's, like you said, you'd have to look at the COAs which means certificate of authenticity or analysis for the product, so you know what's in there as far as the ratio of those cannabinoids and terpenes. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly it. So right now in our current version, it's more of a push rather than a pull. What I mean by that is manufacturers, depending on the laws of that specific state or country, because we're international, the manufacturers are able to upload their certificates of analysis, so we can run an algorithm match to that product. Our next version is we're working directly with labs and other companies to be able to pull in information directly from the lab results and align that specifically with a product. So now you'll be able to go with your recipe to a dispensary or the products that are available currently and say, okay, this matches this, or this is my perfect ratio. You mentioned 1-to-1. Okay, so 1-to-1 with limonene and beta-caryophyllene is my primary and secondary terpene. These are all the products that are available, and these are more aligned with my genetic expression. So the next phase of that is we're aligning products, even if it's CBD products that have a full spectrum profile, that have those specific terpene profiles, and we can make a suggestion on which one of those aligns better with your genetic expression as well. The other thing that we also want to mention is we also look at drug-to-drug interaction. So some people, like CBD, for instance, it can actually affect the efficacy of prescription medication that people are on. So depending on what you're consuming, we'll give you a suggestion, maybe stagger your consumption of CBD if you're taking a certain prescription medication. And how do we know how to stagger? Well, everybody has a certain metabolic rate or metabolic function. So we look at your metabolic function, which is also aligned with your genetics. We look at certain genes, and we can tell you, you may want to stagger. You're an ultra-fast metabolizer, so, wait 15 to 30 minutes. But if you're an ultra-slow metabolizer, maybe you want to wait a few hours. And if that's the case, and if that's your genetic profile, that'll affect the way that you consume cannabis as a whole.
Sure.
So based on method of consumption, you ever probably hear of people having bad experiences with edibles? Well, I mean, a lot of them, not only does your liver convert THC to a different substance, but some people who are ultra-slow metabolizers may have a much more powerful experience with THC through the digestive system than somebody who's an ultra-fast metabolizer.
Sure.
So those are a lot of things we can tell you.
And that leads me to another question, actually. So, I mean, how stable is this test? Like, and what I mean by that is, so I give you my DNA and you're testing that. I mean, and then you're saying, okay, here's the right ratio that you would take to have the experience that, is going to be most beneficial for your health. But then what happens if I change my diet? What happens if I'm exercising, or what if I become sedentary because of an injury? I mean, does that start changing my needs? Would I have to take a test with you guys, like say every 6 months or a year as like a kind of an annual checkup, like, hey, where am I right now as far as figuring out where's the best way for me to consume?
Yeah, I gotta say, this is an excellent question, because this is one thing that I think people need to understand. I'm glad you brought this up. Your genetics, your DNA belongs to you. It does not change. What happens is whether that gene is expressed or not, and it can be expressed through, as you mentioned, nutrition. It can be expressed through a mental state. So you have to look at all those factors. So I'll give you an example. So when I took my 23andMe, my health report on 23andMe, there's a couple things that it told me that I found really curious. I was really fascinated by because it didn't make sense. Number one, it said that I may have some issues sleeping. And I sleep very, 5-6 hours a night. But when I go to sleep, you can shoot a shotgun next to my ear. I'm not waking up. I'm a deep sleeper.
Right.
And the second thing is they said I may have some challenges with caffeine. And I can drink 4 to 5 cups of coffee. I can drink a cup of coffee and fall asleep. Now, does that mean it's wrong? Well, it's not wrong. It's my genetic predisposition. Now, something that I can do in my life, like nutrition or like consuming a certain amount of THC, can trigger that gene. So we give you the roadmap. It shows you where the road is, where the potholes are, where the traffic congestion is. So it's your choice whether you want to go and take the risk of doing that may be triggering that, or you may actually want to take the other road that is, avoiding those potholes and avoiding that congestion.
Sure.
So, but the last factor of this whole thing is the epigenetics factor. And what I mean by that is expression on the cellular level. So now that you have your suggestion, what is your optimal ratio and what's better for you to avoid the adverse reaction, now we have to see what happens on the cellular level. Did this actually work for me? And in order to do that, we'll need some baselines, like maybe a blood draw, plasma draw, and we can kind of follow people, which we're doing with some clinical trials and some observational studies right now, and to see how those ratios are affecting people on a cellular level. And that's kind of the future of where our business is heading towards.
Right. Now, are you going to be doing product formulations in the future for people? So they do this test kit and you go, wait, so here's a blend of like the perfect ratios for you, because it's great to have the roadmap. But then, like you said, I mean, there's got to be an alert or something when these products are ready to go. Otherwise, somebody, they have this great map. It's almost like getting, a video of your dream vacation, but hey, you're never going to go there because you can't get access to it.
I love that analogy. Well, yeah. So as a matter of fact, we have patents on 14 different, we have patents filed on 14 different formulations. Some of them include 0.03% THC and above. The other 7 have less. So we've licensed those formulations. It's basically like a recipe, like this is your KFC recipe, to different manufacturers around the world. And they are developing products that are, as we say, endo-aligned to match closely with those suggested ratios. So yeah, there's a lot of different companies that are creating brands, which we'll be featuring on our website. However, we try to remain agnostic. If somebody else has a product and a brand that matches that genetic profile, great. That's fine. As long as people are getting what they should be getting that's more genetically in line with them and avoiding those adverse effects like, as I mentioned, edibles or anxiety. I mean, I have so many people that talk about, I can't consume cannabis, and even veterans that came back with PTSD and their doctors suggest them to consume cannabis. And these are, people who fought and who are brave and they're afraid to consume cannabis because last time somebody consumed that veteran consumed it, they had a panic attack. And they've never experienced that before. Well, guess what? We can tell genetically that if a person has a certain gene, specifically this one profile called SAAH, then what happens is it breaks down anandamide, which is your bliss hormone. And a person that produces more of that actually produces less anandamide. So they have to deal differently with stress. And high dose of THC can trigger that genetic expression and cause that, anxiety or panic attack. So if we know that about them, we can help them consume the right formulation and still get the benefits of the cannabis plant.
So I want to, before we go for a quick break, I want to ask this one last question then. So are you saying there's still, is cannabis for everybody, or there's still people who genetically just can't take it?
Well, there's cannabis for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Genetically, some people may not or should not consume high dose of THC because that can trigger a negative expression. It doesn't mean they can't consume, and have a little bit of THC. But I think what happens to a lot of people is, so I'll give you an example. So I had a woman that emailed us, and she's a cannabis patient for, she says she's been consuming cannabis for 23 years. And lately, she started getting panic attacks. And she's got a whole bunch of different conditions and diseases. And this is her go-to medicine. And she said, all my life, I was consuming it, but lately, I can't consume it. So what happened was she was consuming higher. Back in the day, she was consuming, 10% THC, and that gene stayed dormant. It didn't express itself. But now she started consuming a higher dose of THC, which actually expressed that gene. And we showed her that in her genetic profile. And she wrote back, she's like, thank God I can consume my medicine the way that I used to before, and it helped me to become me again. And that's kind of what we want to do, is get people to feel like themselves. It's not about being sedated all day. It's not about being high. It's about getting the therapeutic benefits of the plant that genetically align better with you.
Oh, fantastic. Well, listen, Len, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to ask you the question that I think a lot of people have a misconception of, and that is, how important is the percentage of THC in a product? So we'll be right back with Mr. Len May from Endocanna Health right after this break. Want to be a true hemster? Visit us at hcmagazine.com and subscribe to our weekly news updates, or download our app for Android or iOS mobile devices. Now, get hemp with style wherever you are. We're back with Mr. Len May, CEO, co-founder of Endocanna Health. So, Len, before I left, I wanted to just kind of give a little teaser question. How important is THC content in cannabis? Are you discovering that it's, because a lot of people, when they go into a dispensary, they immediately go, well, how high is the THC in this? And they just basically buy based on percentages. And the reason why I ask this question is every year we do this competition called the THC Championship. We do that here in Colorado. And one of the things that I've discovered now, we're going into our 8th year, and I discovered this 8 years ago, is we used to give a score for highest tested product, thinking at the time, of course, in 2011, the highest THC is absolutely a better product. And what we found was the highest tested got a score, and they got a really high score for being the highest tested, but then the People's Choice and the Connoisseur's Choice awards almost never went to the highest THC highest tested THC product. And so I'm really curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are on that from all of your tests. Is it that important how high the THC is?
Well, it's important how high the THC is, because higher THC can actually have some negative side effects for people that have this genetic predisposition. To me, what we've seen based on our research is it's the actual whole plant. So looking at the terpene profiles and looking at the other cannabinoids, not just THC, and how they work together, that's where you get the most therapeutic benefits. So I've been in labs recently, and I've seen some lab results based on mass spectrometer. And what that tool is, it uses certain molecular weight to identify different cannabinoids and different things, properties of the cannabis plant. And we're seeing in some of these really complex strains or cultivars, we're seeing cannabinoids identified, and we don't know what they are. And I've seen in petri dishes, when you put in a full plant extract with different cannabinoids and terpenes, I've seen them affect a cell, a cancer cell, or another disease state cell much more effectively than an isolated molecule. And same thing with different trials for Epidiolex, for instance. The dosage that is suggested is much higher than the research that's coming out of Israel for full plant extract. So all the research is leaning towards the full plant because it works synergistically. So yes, THC is extremely important, especially because a lot of times it can work as an analgesic. It binds to those CB1 receptors. But if you have too much, your body is going to let you know that, and you may have an adverse effect. The other thing is those receptors that get pretty bound pretty quick with high dose of THC. So if you keep consuming high dose of THC, either through a cultivar or strain or a dab, they're not connecting to those receptors anymore because those receptors stay bound. So this is where I think the secret sauce is the terpene profiles, absolutely, and then the minor cannabinoids are in that plant.
See, and I love hearing you say this, because that's kind of what we've learned anecdotally in the industry. If you've been around long enough, you start recognizing it's about the whole plant. It's about how everything synergistically works together. I've always loved using the analogy that when you look at a cannabis plant and you think of it as a car, THC might be the engine. And it's like, you could have a huge Hemi, but if you're sitting on, milk crates for seats, it's not really the best experience for you. And, to me, the terpenes is your leather interior, your sound system mixed in with your CBD and all. It's to me, it's just one element in this whole push that you see a lot of these commercial companies going towards on the isolate, whether it's CBD or THC, is kind of missing the boat, in my opinion. I mean, I understand why they're doing it, because it's easier for them to have a consistent formulation, but I think that we're misleading a lot of the general public when it comes to what type of products make the most sense for them to purchase.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And we didn't go into my background that much, but one of the things I did, I used to be a part owner of 5 different dispensaries in Orange County, California at one point, and we had a cultivation facility, and we used to cultivate this strain, our version of Gorilla Glue, and it was also sold to different other different dispensaries and stuff. And one of the things, it was our most popular cultivar, our most popular strain, and we got the test results, and we were the early adopters of testing. And these dispensaries like, oh man, it's like 30% THC. We said, no, it's 14% THC. Like, well, why is it so good? And I said, the reason why is because it's cured correctly. So the genetic expression of plant, based on the plant itself, you can output as much THC as possible in your cure. The way you actually cure that plant, it can express those glandular secretions of the plant and actually optimize it for full genetic expression, which includes that terpene profile. That's where you get the fragrance, and that synergistically works with the cannabinoids to create that, that effect. And when you get it right, you get it right. And it doesn't matter on, is it a 30 or, a clear or whatever the brand is, whoever's creating these isolated THC profiles. It's something that is fully expressed and that also aligns with your genetic expression.
Sure. Well, and it makes perfect sense to me. I was in the alcohol industry for quite some time. I was a professional actor, so I was a bartender, of course. I used to, of course, I knew a lot about about spirits, whether it was whiskey or rum or beer or wine, but never did anybody go, what's the alcohol content in that before they bought it? And yet, when you look at marijuana, that's all they ask about, and that's all I see the bud tenders talking about. Not all of them. There are really good ones out there. I don't mean to do a broad over generalization, but their go-to tends to be when they talk to somebody, oh, well, this is 26% THC. And they'll lead them away from those 14, 15, 16% THCs because they just write them off as not as good of a product. And it just always cracked me up. Nobody ever asked that, hey, what's that percentage of alcohol in that wine? Nobody asked that question, and I think that when you do what you're doing, when people start being educated more, they start recognizing that it's more about how does this affect you individually, and so I really love the work that you're doing. Now, you did mention, we didn't really touch on your background a little bit, and that was kind of the point of why I wanted to have you on the show, is to kind of learn more about what you're doing, who you are and how you've gotten into this industry. So we're kind of going backwards, but really, how did you start getting into this? What drew you to the cannabis industry to begin with, Len?
Well, first of all, I'm a patient. So when I was in my early teens, I was diagnosed with ADD, and it was at the time that they didn't have the H, so it wasn't ADHD, it was ADD, and I didn't have the hyper anyway. So I sort of had like the dreamer thing. I had a bunch of different thoughts that go into my head, and it's hard. It's like many tabs to your computer open at the same time. And they put me on all kinds of prescription medication, and I hated all of it. It all numbed me, didn't make me feel good. And then I discovered cannabis through hanging out with some older kids, and that became my go-to medicine. And I never knew that it was a therapeutic medicine for anybody else except for me and I became an activist for it until I held a rally in Philadelphia Independence Hall. I'm from Philadelphia originally, and I live in LA now for the last 10 years. But I had a keynote speaker, a lady named Elvie Masika, who's one of the first person to get federally prescribed cannabis under an IND program the federal government had. And when I saw her consuming cannabis for her degenerative glaucoma, and she couldn't see until she consumed, it was my aha moment. I was like, oh, well, this is medicine for more people than just me, and sort of kind of continued down that line. And when I moved to LA, I thought the best way that I can kind of get this plant out to as many people as possible was through dispensaries. So like I said, I became a part owner of dispensaries, and that was my focus. But the frustrating part of it had to do with people that had disease states, and we would go and we recommend a certain strain, let's say Blue Dream for a person that had Parkinson's. And they would call me up and say, hey, it's not working for me. I'm like, well, I know that it works. You got it at your dispensary, and it's Blue Dream. So I couldn't figure that out. And I went on the internet, and my ADD, I'm either all over the place, many tabs open, or when something really stimulates me, I can hyper focus. So I became obsessed to try to find out the solution to this. And I came across a video by a guy named Kevin McKernan, who's the first person to genetically sequence cannabis. So I ended up reaching out to Kevin, and we ended up working together, and I focused on the plant genetics. I traveled around the country in Canada, and I took clippings of different cannabis plants, extracted DNA from them, purified it, and sent it to Boston to a sequencer. So we started a cannabis library, or a cultivar library called Cannapedia, to look at the different genetic profiles of the different strains, as you mentioned. So now we can say, well, this is genetically Blue Dream, this is genetically not Blue Dream, so let's try to identify what that is. But the other missing piece was the human side of it. So yes, it's Blue Dream, but this Blue Dream is not working for me the way that this other profile is working for me. So the parent company of this company I work with, they did pharmacogenetic testing, which is genetic testing for different disease states like cancer, autism, epilepsy. And, it was my other kind of hyper-focused moment to start working with their science team and try to come up with, see if there's any other genetic markers in the human side, which I was able to find. So having left that and started Endo, for the first year and a half, we have 4 PhD, MD scientists are working with us and conducting research. So we look at every single SNP, which is part of a gene that affects directly or indirectly your endocannabinoids. The second part of that was to make sure that whatever we suggest has a peer-reviewed essay, trial, or study associated with that we can reference. That was the other part of the research. And then we built an artificial intelligence, the AI deep learning methodology that looks at every single study that goes on in the world currently and in the past and updates your report. So you have lifetime updates as new studies come on board.
Fantastic.
So that's basically kind of how I got to where I was in a very long 27 years to where I am today.
Right. So how seriously is the rest of the scientific community taking the work that you guys are doing?
Very seriously, yeah. We're involved so we're doing 6 clinical trials right now in Australia with a partner named Ward Medication Management. Ward Medication Management is one of the top companies in the world for drug-to-drug interaction. That's what you would use in the hospital when you go in and you're on 4 different medications. They have to give you a 5th one. They look at their database to see how that 5th one is going to interact with the 4 that you're taking. So we're doing the first one is late-stage dementia, Alzheimer's patients. The next one is PTSD. We're doing an observational study that will be submitted for a clinical trial right now on what's close to home for me, ADHD. And we're working with other scientists supporting, I would say, about 3 other trials where they're using our swabs as a screening tool. So what I mean by that is everybody that comes into this trial is going to get swabbed, and we're going to be able to see if the genotype or the genetic expression actually changes the effect of how these people are consuming their cannabis and what the results are going to be. So yeah, the scientific community is definitely jumping on, and I think if you see what happened with the FDA in approving 23andMe as a diagnostic tool, their healthcare report, now it opens up the path to a lot of other genetic companies to be taken a lot more seriously as a diagnostic tool by the scientific community.
Before we leave, I just do want to address the 23andMe thing, because a lot of people feel like if they do 23andMe, they're giving away their data. 23andMe basically owns their DNA, so to speak, is one of the fears that people might have if they're doing that with Endocanna Health. Can you answer any of those concerns people might have?
Yeah, I mean, that was the reason why the analogy was interesting to me, because that's what people say, and I understand how people can relate to that. But 23andMe says it on their privacy policy that when they were selling your data to pharmaceutical companies, and they are open about it because GlaxoSmithKline invested $350 million into them for that data. We anonymize all the data. So all the information, everything resides on Amazon's AWS server. All the information anonymized and HIPAA compliant. So what that means is that your personal information resides on one server, your DNA resides on a different server. Both are encrypted, and both actually have a serial number, a key that's associated with that. So the only people that can connect your personal information and your DNA are you. And if you want to share that with your physician, you can do that. We don't care about Len May's personal information. We care that we have 1,000 people with the same genetic profile that consume this type of cannabinoid ratio and have gotten this result. And the reason why we care about that, so we can communicate that information back to the cannabis community, because we can start making much more effective products that are more individualized and personalized. And that's really what our mission is.
Well, that's enough from me, honestly, Len. I'm gonna go ahead and get my test soon. Then I'm just curious, man. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna take the test and I'm gonna share my experiences with my viewers, because I am fascinated by this process. I've never done the 23andMe for the very reason that you just mentioned. I don't want to give away that information. I am a little bit of I'm just a little skeptical of any of that kind of stuff. So, but hearing what you're saying and knowing who you are, yeah, I'm definitely interested in checking out what you guys are doing. So you sold me.
I'll put out another offer.
Okay.
If you do that, what I'll do is I'll be happy to go over the results with you individually and personally. And if you want to have that as another show, you're more than welcome to do that. If you're willing to expose genetic information.
Why not? Well, yeah, I'm absolutely. Hey, I can edit it if I don't want anybody to know something. So I'm totally down with that, Len. Yeah. So you know what, everybody, stay tuned on another show. It probably won't be on this part, but maybe on the Hemp Connoisseur Shows podcast. We will we'll go over my DNA, my dinner, and we'll talk about what the best cannabis strain or best ratio is for me. So I'm really intrigued by this.
One more thing, David, I forgot to mention one more thing.
Yeah.
So if somebody has taken a 23andMe, an Ancestry.com, a MyHeritage DNA, any of the other genetic tests, and right now I think there's around 30 million people that have. If you have taken that, you don't have to swab. You can just upload your raw data that you already own into Endocanna, EndocannaHealth.com, and we'll give you they report within 30 seconds.
Wow.
So it's only as good as the version of, what was used by 23andMe.
Sure.
But it'll give you a pretty good indication, and it's instantaneous.
Wow. Well, that's fantastic. I love hearing that. So listen, guys, we're going to close out this. We'll have a link to Endocanna and how to take the test. It'll be right there in the information on the podcast. So if you guys are interested in checking this out, you can go right to that link and link to what they're doing and get your test. You can order your test. Or, again, like Len said, if you've already done a 23andMe or Ancestry.com, you can go ahead and upload it right there. Len, it's a fascinating conversation. I feel like we're just scratching the surface of this, so I'm definitely going to want to talk to you again at another time and check in with you. And again, now I'm really excited because you're giving me another show, man. So we're going to do this. I'm going to take this test, and we'll have to, next time you're in Colorado, man, we'll have to do you'll have to come to the studio in person, and we can go over my DNA results. Hopefully it won't be too embarrassing.
No, let's do it, man. I really appreciate the opportunity. I love talking about this. And by you providing the platform, it's really an amazing opportunity. So I really thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Len. Yeah, like I said, we'll check back in with you really soon. So thanks for being on the show today.
You got it. Thank you.
All right, guys. What a fascinating conversation today with Mr. Len May. Like I said, check out Endocanna Health and get your DNA tested to know what the best cannabis is for you to check out. My name is David Madalena. I am your host. Please check us out at hcmagazine.com or download our app from the Apple App Store or Android. Until next time, peace, love, and happiness. You've been listening to HC Magazine's People You Should Know. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to us at hcmagazine.com or you can download our app on Android and iOS devices. Now, you can get hemp with style at your fingertips wherever you are.